I want to tell you this because some stories need to be spoken aloud to be believed, and this one is mine. Every word of it is true, a testament to the fact that sometimes the only way to heal a wound is to turn the scar into a weapon. The champagne flute felt cold and alien in my hand, its slender stem a fragile anchor in a sea of old money and even older secrets. It was our engagement party, held in the cavernous ballroom of the Davenport family's Beacon Hill mansion, a place that smelled of lemon polish and generational wealth. I was standing near the French doors overlooking the manicured gardens, watching Alex, my fiancé, laugh with his father. My ring, a ridiculously large sapphire that had belonged to his great-grandmother, felt heavy on my finger, a beautiful, glittering manacle. That was when his sister Victoria glided up to me, her smile as sharp and brilliant as the diamond earrings she wore. She leaned in close, her perfume a suffocating cloud of tuberose and condescension, and whispered, her voice a silken dagger meant only for me. "That ring is a family heirloom, you know. Enjoy wearing it tonight, because a girl like you will never truly fit in with us." If you genuinely enjoy our stories, please subscribe to the channel, tell us where you're from, and what time it is right now. It's always fascinating to know how far our story flows. The barb landed exactly as she'd intended, a tiny poisoned dart in the heart of my joy. I managed a tight smile, a pathetic little twitch of the lips that I hoped looked like polite confusion. But inside, a cold dread began to crystallize. A girl like me. It was a phrase I'd been hearing in subtle, unspoken ways for the entire 6 months I'd known Alex Davenport. I was from a quiet, middle-class neighborhood in Somerville, the daughter of a librarian and a high school history teacher. I'd worked my way through architecture school at MIT on a cocktail of scholarships and late-night waitressing shifts. My world was built on grit, passion, and the quiet satisfaction of earning my place. The Davenports' world was built on foundations laid centuries ago, a fortress of inherited status and unbreachable social codes. I had met Alex at a charity auction where my small, up-and-coming firm had donated a design consultation package. He was charming, handsome, in that effortless, Kennedy-esque way that Boston's elite seemed to mass-produce. He pursued me with a relentless, flattering intensity. He said he was captivated by my drive, my passion for creating tangible beauty from nothing. He called my ambition refreshing, compared to the debutantes he'd grown up with, women whose life's work was planning charity galas and summering in Nantucket. For a while I believed him. I believed that he saw me. Clara Reed, the architect, the dreamer, the woman who could see the soul of a building in a pile of blueprints. I was so caught up in the romance of it, in the dizzying ascent from my cramped South End apartment to this Beacon Hill palace, that I willfully ignored the little red flags that fluttered at the edges of my vision. The first was his mother, Eleanor Davenport, a woman so perfectly preserved she looked like she belonged behind velvet ropes at the Museum of Fine Arts. During our first dinner, she'd examined my hands after I mentioned my past waitressing jobs. "How wonderful that you're not afraid of hard work," she'd said, her tone implying it was a quaint, slightly grubby hobby, like collecting garden gnomes. Then there were the constant, casual dismissals of my work. I was designing a low-income community housing project in Roxbury, a project I poured my heart into. When I tried to explain the innovative, sustainable design to Alex's father, a real estate tycoon whose company only built sterile glass towers for corporations, he had simply patted my shoulder and said, "That's very noble, dear. A girl needs a little project to keep her busy." They never saw it as a career. To them, it was my little project. But Victoria was the true artist of the family's disdain. She was the gatekeeper of their world, and from the beginning, she had made it clear that I was not getting past the velvet rope. She would offer backhanded compliments that were structured like conversational landmines. "Oh, Clara, that dress is so brave," she'd say, her eyes sweeping over the dress I'd saved for weeks to buy. "You can just tell you don't care what anyone thinks." She'd helpfully correct my pronunciation of a French wine or a famous artist, always in front of her friends, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. Alex would just squeeze my hand under the table and whisper, "That's just Vicky, don't mind her." He never defended me, not once. He treated her casual cruelty like a regrettable but unchangeable weather pattern. Her whisper at the engagement party, however, was different. It wasn't a microaggression. It was a declaration of war. It was a confirmation of my deepest insecurity, that I was an imposter, a fraud they were all tolerating until they got bored. I watched her walk away, rejoining her circle of friends, who all shot me quick, pitying glances. I felt my face burning. I looked over at Alex, still laughing, completely oblivious. In that moment, the magnificent ballroom felt like a cage, and the glittering guests were my spectators. I was the evening's entertainment, the girl from Somerville playing princess for a night. The weeks that followed were a slow, agonizing unraveling of the fantasy I had so desperately wanted to believe. Victoria's words had been a key, unlocking a room in my mind I had kept sealed shut. Now I couldn't stop seeing things for what they were. Alex's compliments started to sound like subtle corrections. When I showed him the preliminary designs for a new library competition I was entering, he glanced at them for a moment before saying, "It's great, babe. Really creative. But maybe a little ambitious for your first big solo project? You don't want to overreach." It was the same word his father had used, ambitious, but from Alex's lips, it sounded like a synonym for delusional. He started talking about our future in a way that chilled me to the bone. "Once we're married, you won't have to kill yourself with work anymore," he said one evening, swirling a glass of scotch that cost more than my weekly groceries. "You can take on a few passion projects, maybe design a summer home for us in the Hamptons. My father could really use your eye on some of his residential developments too. Just consulting, of course." He saw my life's work, the very core of my identity, as a switch that could be flipped off once I had his name. I wasn't to be his partner. I was to be his accessory, another beautiful object to be housed in his perfect life. The suspicion that had been a faint whisper grew into a roar. This wasn't just about snobbery. There was something else, something more calculated at play. The Davenports didn't do anything without a purpose. They didn't just accept a middle-class architect into their dynasty out of the goodness of their hearts. I started paying closer attention, listening more than I spoke at their suffocating family dinners. I noticed how Alex's father would casually ask me for my opinion on zoning laws or my thoughts on the viability of a particular neighborhood for urban renewal, which was his euphemism for gentrification. He wasn't making conversation. He was mining me for free data, for insights my firm had spent thousands of dollars to research. The breaking point, the moment of horrifying clarity, came about a month before the wedding. I had gone to the Davenport mansion to drop off some fabric swatches for the wedding planner. I let myself in with the key Alex had given me, the house silent and empty, or so I thought. As I walked past the study, I heard voices from within, Alex and Victoria. I paused, my hand on the doorknob, something primal telling me to stay hidden. "She's getting sentimental about that library competition," Alex was saying, his voice laced with an unfamiliar annoyance. "She's up all night sketching. It's becoming a distraction." Victoria's laugh was like ice cubes clinking in a glass. "Let her have her little hobby. It keeps her mind off what's really happening. Is she still feeding you notes on the seaport development?" "Every night," Alex said, and I could hear the smug pride in his voice. "She thinks I'm just interested in her day. She has no idea her brilliant insights are the backbone of the pitch Dad is giving to the investors next week. Her analysis of the structural and community integration issues is, well, it's worth millions. And we're getting it for the price of a few fancy dinners and a family heirloom." My blood ran cold. I pressed my ear against the heavy oak door, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Just make sure you keep her happy until the contracts are signed," Victoria warned. "After that, it doesn't matter. We can absorb her little firm into the Davenport Holdings umbrella as a wedding gift. She'll be the in-house talent, and Dad will have final say on everything. She'll be so grateful she won't even realize she's been neutered. Neutered. The word slammed into me with physical force. They weren't just looking down on me. They were using me. My love, my trust, my talent, it was all just a resource to be exploited. Alex's courtship, his compliments about my refreshing ambition, his proposal, it was all a lie. It was a long, elaborate corporate acquisition disguised as a love story. I wasn't the blushing bride-to-be. I was the asset being stripped. The beautiful sapphire on my finger suddenly felt like it was burning a hole through my skin. I backed away from the door, silent as a ghost, my mind a maelstrom of shock and white-hot fury. I clutched the fabric swatches so tightly my knuckles turned white. They had made a fatal miscalculation. They saw a girl from Somerville who was desperate to fit in. They had no idea they were dealing with an architect, a woman who knew that before you can build something magnificent, you first have to burn the old, rotten structure to the ground. And I was going to enjoy every second of the demolition. The Davenports wielded their power like a birthright, an invisible scepter that parted crowds and bent the will of the city to their whim. Their name was etched in brass plaques on the sides of buildings all over Boston, the Davenport Wing at Mass General, the Davenport Gallery at the MFA, the Davenport Charitable Foundation that was, in reality, a sophisticated tool for tax evasion and social maneuvering. They moved through the world with the serene confidence of people who had never been told no. Their power wasn't just financial. It was a deeply rooted, systemic influence that snaked its way through the city's political, social, and corporate veins. To oppose them was to oppose the very structure of Boston's elite society. After I overheard that conversation, I began to see their power not as an intimidating force, but as a weapon they were actively aiming at my head. Alex's behavior shifted. My new, quiet watchfulness must have registered as pre-wedding jitters, because he doubled down on his condescending reassurances. He'd frame his attempts to control me as acts of love. "Don't worry about the library competition, Clara," he'd say, placing his hand over my sketchbook. "Your real project is us." He started making decisions about my career without consulting me. He told his father I'd be thrilled to consult on a new luxury condo project, a soulless glass box that stood for everything I hated about modern architecture. When I protested, he looked at me with patronizing concern. "Babe, this is a huge opportunity. My father is handing you a prime project. It's what's best for your career, for our future." He was already treating me like a subsidiary of Davenport Holdings. Victoria, meanwhile, reveled in her role as my handler. She took me shopping on Newbury Street, not as a friendly gesture, but as a re-education campaign. She'd hold up a demure beige dress and say, "This is more appropriate for a Davenport event. Your style is a little loud." She was trying to sand down my edges, to mold me into a bland, palatable accessory that wouldn't clash with the family's decor. Every outing was a performance of their superiority. We'd go to lunch at L'Espalier, and she would greet the maître d' by name, order for both of us without asking, and then spend the entire meal name-dropping people I'd never met, ensuring I felt like a tourist in a world where she was royalty. They were isolating me, systematically cutting me off from my own identity, confident in their power to remake me in their image. They believed they were invincible, that their wealth and status formed an impenetrable shield. And they almost were. They had the best lawyers, the most influential friends, the kind of money that made problems simply disappear. My own world felt laughably small in comparison. My firm consisted of me and 2 junior designers working out of a rented space with a leaky ceiling. My savings account was respectable, but it was a rounding error on their balance sheets. A direct confrontation would be suicide. They could crush me, blacklist me from every reputable firm in the city, and paint me as a hysterical, gold-digging ex-fiancé who couldn't handle the pressure. They held all the cards, and they knew it. That arrogance, that absolute certainty of their own power, was the chink in their armor. It made them sloppy. It made them underestimate the girl from Somerville. And that was the mistake that would cost them everything. For 3 days after I overheard their plan, I was a ghost. I moved through my life on autopilot, the rage and heartbreak a churning sea of nausea in my stomach. I went to cake tastings and floral appointments, smiling and nodding as Eleanor Davenport debated the merits of peonies versus hydrangeas, all the while picturing myself setting the mansion on fire. I let Alex hold my hand, his touch feeling like a spider crawling on my skin, while he talked about our honeymoon in Tuscany. Part of me wanted to shatter, to scream, to expose them right there in the middle of the Boston Public Library as we reviewed invitation fonts. But I knew that a messy, emotional outburst was exactly what they'd expect. It would play right into their narrative of me being unstable, unworthy. No, my revenge had to be as quiet, precise, and devastating as the whisper that had started it all. It had to be a masterpiece of architectural demolition. The turning point came on a Thursday night. I was in my studio, the city lights of Boston twinkling outside my window. I had the schematics for the library competition spread out on my drafting table. It was my passion project, a design that was bold, innovative, and deeply connected to the community it was meant to serve. Alex had called it a cute little hobby. His family saw it as a distraction. Looking at the clean, elegant lines of my own creation, something inside me solidified. This was mine. My talent, my vision, my intellect. These were things they couldn't buy, couldn't own, and couldn't control unless I let them. They saw me as a resource to be plundered, an asset to be absorbed. But an architect knows the true strength of a structure lies in its foundation. My foundation was my work, and I would use it to build my way out of this prison and then tear theirs down, brick by gilded brick. My resolve settled into a cold, hard diamond in my chest. The tears stopped. The nausea subsided, replaced by an electrifying clarity. I was no longer Alex's fiancé. I was a strategist planning a campaign. My first move was to play the part they had cast for me. I became the perfect, compliant bride-to-be. I gushed over the wedding plans. I asked Alex's father for his brilliant advice on my firm's minor projects, feeding him useless, outdated information. I let Alex think he was soothing my pre-wedding jitters, all while I was meticulously gathering my ammunition. I started secretly forwarding every email, every project proposal, every piece of data Alex had solicited from me to a private encrypted account. I created a timeline, documenting every instance where they had used my intellectual property for their seaport pitch. I was building a case, a fortress of evidence. While playing the docile fiancé by day, I spent my nights secretly preparing my exit. I polished my portfolio until it gleamed. I reached out to a headhunter who specialized in the international architecture scene, someone far outside the Davenport sphere of influence. I started liquidating my personal assets, converting them into cash, making myself as mobile as possible. I was detaching myself wire by wire from the bomb they had strapped to my life. The final piece of my plan was the most important. I needed to not just leave, but to leave a mark. The Davenports' power was built on their reputation, their public image of untouchable philanthropic grace. That was where I had to strike. The annual Boston Preservation Alliance Gala was in 2 weeks. It was the social event of the season, and the Davenports were the chairs of the committee this year. It was their night to shine. It would be the perfect stage. I looked at the sapphire ring on my finger. It wasn't a symbol of love. It was a leash. I slipped it off and placed it on my desk, next to the library blueprints. The weight was gone. My hand felt light, free. A fierce, predatory smile touched my lips for the first time in weeks. They had wanted to absorb my little firm, to neuter my talent and make it their own. They thought they were acquiring a new asset. They had no idea they had just declared war on a woman who knew exactly how to design a perfect, catastrophic collapse. The gala wasn't going to be their coronation. It was going to be their public execution. The war began not with a bang, but with a quiet, surgical strike. I spent the next 2 weeks living a double life. By day, I was Clara Reed, the doting fiancé, finalizing seating charts and feigning excitement over a life I had no intention of living. By night, I was a general, marshaling my forces. I worked relentlessly on the library competition, pouring every ounce of my pain and fury into the design. It became more than a building. It was my declaration of independence, a structure of glass and steel and light that represented everything the Davenports were not: transparent, innovative, and built for the people, not for profit. My secret weapon was my meticulous documentation. The emails where Alex had casually asked for my thoughts on the Seaport project, my detailed notes that he had passed off as his own. I compiled it all into a neat, damning dossier. I consulted an old law school friend, making her sign a rock-solid NDA before I laid out the situation. She was horrified, but her eyes lit up with a predatory legal glee. "This isn't just unethical, Clara," she'd said, tapping the file. "This is intellectual property theft. Davenport Holdings is presenting your proprietary analysis to investors as their own work. This is a multi-million-dollar fraud case waiting to happen." That was my insurance policy. The ace up my sleeve. The night of the Preservation Alliance Gala arrived. It was held at the Boston Park Plaza, the ballroom dripping with chandeliers and old-world opulence. The Davenports were in their element, greeting senators and CEOs with practiced ease. Victoria was a vision in blood-red silk, her eyes sweeping the room with the arrogance of a queen surveying her court. I wore a simple, elegant black dress, a stark contrast to the glittering gowns around me. I was a shadow, waiting for my moment. Alex, ever the peacock, preened at my side. "See?" he whispered, his arm possessively around my waist. "This is our world now. Isn't it better than some dusty community meeting in Roxbury?" I just smiled, a serene, chilling smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. My moment came during the main presentation. Alex's father, William Davenport, took the stage to give the keynote address. He was going to announce the family's latest triumph, the final round of funding for their massive seaport development, the very project built on my stolen work. As he approached the podium, I excused myself from the table, telling Alex I needed some air. Instead of going outside, I found the head of the alliance, a well-respected older woman named Mrs. Albright, whom I had met on several occasions. I handed her a slim manila envelope. "Mrs. Albright," I said, my voice low and steady, "I have a matter of professional ethics I must bring to your attention. It concerns the keynote speaker." Her eyes widened as she opened the envelope and saw the first few pages of my evidence, a side-by-side comparison of my design notes and a page from the Davenport Holdings investor pitch. On stage, William Davenport was just beginning his speech, talking about integrity and vision. As he spoke, a quiet commotion began at the back of the room. Mrs. Albright was conferring with the Alliance's legal counsel, their faces grim. They began speaking to one of the event coordinators, who then approached the stage manager. I had slipped back to a vantage point near the ballroom doors, my heart a steady, cold drum. I watched as the stage manager walked onto the stage and whispered something to a stunned William Davenport. The microphone was cut. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. Mrs. Albright then walked to the podium herself. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, her voice ringing with authority, "there has been a serious allegation brought to our attention concerning Davenport Holdings. In light of this, we will be postponing the rest of this evening's presentation, pending a full investigation." Gasps echoed through the ballroom. All eyes swiveled to the Davenport family table. Victoria's face was a mask of disbelief, her perfect smile frozen in place. Eleanor looked as if she might faint. William Davenport stood on the stage, sputtering, his face turning a blotchy, furious red. And then I made my final move. I walked back to the table, my steps deliberate and sure. Alex rushed toward me, his face a mixture of confusion and panic. "Clara, what the hell is going on?" he hissed. I didn't answer him. I simply looked him in the eye, my expression devoid of any warmth. I slowly, deliberately pulled the sapphire ring from my finger. I didn't just hand it to him. I placed it in the center of the untouched, pristine dinner plate at his seat. It clattered against the porcelain with a sound that seemed to echo in the sudden, tense silence of the room. "This heirloom," I said, my voice clear and calm, loud enough for the entire table to hear, "belongs with a family that understands its value." I looked pointedly at his father, still stranded on stage. "I'm afraid you've devalued your entire portfolio tonight." Then I turned and walked away. I didn't run. I walked, my back straight, through the parting sea of Boston's elite, their whispers following me like the rustling of leaves. I didn't look back. The war had just begun, but I had already won the most important battle. I had taken back my name. Leaving that ballroom was like taking my first breath after being held underwater for a year. The chaos I left in my wake was a distant storm, and for the first time, I felt the sun on my face. The next few days were a blur of delicious, gratifying carnage. The Boston Globe got wind of the story, and a carefully placed anonymous tip from my lawyer friend gave them just enough to start digging. The headline was subtle but devastating. Davenport Seaport Project under scrutiny amid allegations of unethical sourcing. The investors got spooked. The funding was frozen. The Davenport empire, which had seemed so invincible, suddenly had a crack in its foundation. They tried to retaliate, of course. William Davenport used his influence to call every major architectural firm in the city, blacklisting me. He painted me as a scorned, vindictive woman. But he made a critical error. He assumed his influence was limitless. He didn't know I was already gone. 2 days after the gala, I was on a plane to Singapore, accepting a senior designer position with a prestigious international firm that had been courting me for months. A firm that saw my ambitious library design not as a hobby, but as a work of genius. They didn't care about Boston gossip. They cared about talent. The next 3 years were a blur of hard work and exhilarating freedom. I threw myself into my work, designing soaring skyscrapers in Dubai, sustainable communities in Copenhagen, and a breathtaking modern art museum in Seoul. I was no longer Clara Reed, the girl from Somerville trying to fit in. I was Clara Reed, the award-winning architect. My name became synonymous with bold, visionary design. I was building my own empire, one that was forged from my own talent, not inherited from anyone. I rarely thought of the Davenports, but occasionally news would trickle back to me through old colleagues. Their seaport project had collapsed entirely, mired in lawsuits and bad press. Their social standing had taken a permanent, crippling hit. Victoria had gone through a messy public divorce. Alex, I heard, was working a mid-level job in his family's diminished company, his charm having curdled into a bitter resentment. They were fading, a dynasty in decline, their name now a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. It was on a business trip back to the States that I met Marcus Thorne. I was giving a keynote speech at a tech and design conference in San Francisco. He was the closing speaker, a self-made billionaire who had revolutionized the data storage industry. He was brilliant, intense, and possessed a quiet confidence that was the antithesis of Alex's arrogant swagger. After my speech, he approached me, not with a slick pickup line, but with a series of sharp, insightful questions about my use of sustainable materials in urban planning. He had actually listened. He saw my mind before he saw anything else. Our conversation continued over dinner and then over the next few weeks through long-distance calls that lasted late into the night. He was from a working-class family in Ohio and had built his company from his college dorm room. He understood ambition because he lived it. He didn't find my passion intimidating. He found it thrilling. When he looked at me, I felt seen in a way I never had with Alex. He wasn't trying to acquire me or change me. He was simply in awe of who I already was. Our romance blossomed, and a year later he proposed. Not with a heavy, haunted heirloom, but with a simple, elegant ring he had designed himself, featuring a rare, star-shaped diamond. "Because," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you're my entire constellation." Our wedding was a small, private affair on the coast of Big Sur. There was no pretense, no social posturing. It was just us, our families, and the people who genuinely loved us. I finally understood what it felt like to be part of a family, not just a prospective acquisition. The ultimate revenge, however, came unintentionally. Marcus was a passionate philanthropist, and his next big project was a personal one. He wanted to build a world-class children's hospital in his home state of Ohio, and he wanted me to be the lead architect. It was the project of a lifetime, a chance to create a space of healing and hope. The news of the Thorne-Reed Pediatric Hospital made national headlines. It was a project of unprecedented scale and vision, funded by one of the largest private donations in medical history. And there was my name, front and center, celebrated for its innovation and humanity. The true payoff, the moment that felt like the closing of a circle, was at the annual Architects Guild Award ceremony in New York City. My design for the hospital won the highest honor, the coveted Pritzker Prize of the architectural world. It was the crowning achievement of my career. As I walked to the stage to accept the award, a massive screen behind me projected images of my work, the soaring glass atrium of the hospital, the hopeful, light-filled patient rooms, the healing gardens I had designed. I gave my speech, thanking my team, my parents, and my husband, Marcus, who was watching from the front row, his eyes shining with pride. As I walked off the stage, my award in hand, I passed a table near the back. And there they were, the Davenports. William looked old and shrunken in his tuxedo. Victoria's face was a tight, bitter mask of plastic surgery and envy. And Alex. Alex looked hollowed out, a ghost of the charming man I once thought I knew. Our eyes met for a fleeting second. In his, I saw a toxic cocktail of regret, disbelief, and impotent rage. He was looking at the woman he had tried to break, the talent he had tried to steal, and seeing a level of success and happiness his world of inherited privilege could never touch. I didn't smile. I didn't sneer. I simply held his gaze for a moment, my expression calm and unreadable. I gave him nothing. No anger, no pity, no acknowledgement of the power he once held over me. Then I turned and walked back to my husband, back to my life, a life I had built myself, on my own terms. Their ruin wasn't my primary goal, but it was a deeply satisfying consequence. They hadn't just lost a deal or a fiancé, they had lost the future because they were too busy worshiping the past. Marcus and I left the award ceremony, stepping out into the crisp New York night. The air was cool and clean. We walked hand in hand through the glittering city, two people from humble beginnings who had built their own empires. He squeezed my hand and looked at me, his face filled with so much love it almost hurt. "Are you happy, Clara?" he asked, his voice soft. I looked up at the towering skyscrapers, structures of steel and glass and human ambition, all reaching for the stars. I thought of the girl in the Beacon Hill mansion, feeling small and worthless. I thought of the woman who had burned that life to the ground and designed a new one from the ashes. I leaned my head on his shoulder, the heavy, prestigious award in my other hand feeling as light as a feather. They were right about one thing. I never did fit in with them. The end.